This month our test should probably be called a medium test rather than a big test. John Fillmore Contractors' FUSO Enduro FO 3128 8x4 is the largest of the Enduro range, but with only 285 horsepower, it's certainly not anywhere near the power and GVM rating of the trucks we've been road testing in recent months. To put it into context, Trevor was driving a 285 horsepower Mack back in the late 70s, early 80s, and in those days it was a big truck. It was a bit different because it was an 11-litre engine with 1464 newton metres at 1,000 RPM. Today's engine is a 6.4-litre engine developing 1120 newton metres between 1,200 and 1,600 RPM. When we meet up with Paul on the new Enduro, he's heading off to the Hunua quarry to pick up the first of 2 loads of metal for a new school being built at Huapai, northwest of the city. Visually, the overwhelming first impression of the Enduro is how tall it stands. Riding on 22.5 steel wheels and 295/80 Bridgestone tyres, with load-sharing parabolic springs and anti-roll bars on the reverse Elliott steer axles, and semi-elliptic spring suspension on the FUSO drive axles with torque rods. The rear axles, with a 22-tonne combine rating, have inter-axle and cross-locks. The climb up into the cab is a bit of a problem with an extremely high bottom step that we all find less than comfortable. There's a real need here for a lower step on this cab entry, such as we see on many construction truck models, that is hinged to avoid damage in the rough ground conditions where there's risk of it being knocked. It's an engine that produces its 285 horsepower peak at 2200 RPM, with 275 horsepower of that available between 2000 and 2300 RPM. Peak torque of 1120 newton metres is delivered between 1200 and 1600 RPM, with 1000 newton metres of that between 1000 and 1800 RPM. It's not a bad working environment at all, with all controls within easy reach, maybe other than the passenger window winder switch, which is farthest from the driver on the left of the central dash display. Both window control switches are on the dash, so at least the driver can operate both windows from his seat. Immediately in front of the driver is a tidy instrument cluster, with speedo and tacho, air pressure gauges and a fuel gauge which includes an exhaust treatment level indicator. There's a good adjustment in the steering. The right-hand stalk controls the engine brake and the left controls indicators and wipers plus dip switch. There's a full air seat for the driver with integrated seatbelt. It's a fairly standard seat but provides reasonable levels of support. Trevor starts his test out of Winston's quarry Hunua with a load of TNZ 40, giving an all-up weight around 25 tonne and a payload of 13.2 tonne. Our run out of the quarry is all downhill for the first stretch as we drop down Hunua Road into Papakura. We engage the combined engine and exhaust brake and come down the hill in 6th gear with just a few touches on the surface brakes for some of the sharper corners. With only a 6.4-litre engine, you can't expect too much retardation, but it does give reasonable control on this descent and all the others we encountered on this drive. Paul is back at the wheel for the repeat of the same run. Further on in the Waterview Tunnel, there's a slow-moving bus in front of us and Paul changes down to 7th gear to maintain the engine revs at 2200 RPM as we head up the rise out of the tunnel and onto the northwestern motorway. Luckily, the clutch is not too heavy and the synchro box handles it easily. The gear shift is a bit stiff, and this is similar to what Trevor experienced in Isaac's Iveco Tracker manual we drove back in mid-2017. It's got that new truck feel and we're sure it'll loosen up a bit with use. Once off the end of the Western Motorway on State Highway 16, we come across the only major hill we encounter, just past the Coatesville Riverhead turnoff. We drop 2 gears down to 6th and drop to 35 k's an hour as we reach the top. At Huapai, another load's delivered. There are no issues here, but on sites with poor traction, the diff locks will come in handy. As Paul reckons, you always get a little bit of wheel spin if you're on an angle. If you're on a flat area, no problems. There is one negative he's encountered in terms of the Enduro's manoeuvrability. It's turning circle. You can't turn around on a normal road, he says. You have to go to another road, turn in and back around. It's just something you have to be aware of when going to a new site.